Hi, thanks everyone. I might get to money later, but first of all, just say very quickly, I don't have to say all about the benefits because we've heard about that several times. I often try to think what's unique about community-led housing and what it can do in addition, but actually isn't one thing that's unique. If we have a list of about 10 different things that community-led housing can do. In terms of, there have been a couple of mentions already to community-led housing becoming a more mainstream sector. And I think in order to be able to do that, there's a real role for councils and housing associations in creating opportunities for community-led housing. So far, I think we're in a good place in London, in that perhaps a few years ago we'd be having to refer to Germany and other parts of Europe, and then a few years later we could point to places like Leeds, but now in London I think we've got built examples of almost every single type of community-led housing that might be conceivable. I'm sure there'll be loads of other new, inventive, original, unique ideas emerging from communities, but that feels like a really positive place to be. But so far, most of those have been, and they need the support and engagement of local authorities or housing associations in one way or another. And so far, that's been fairly ad hoc, and where there have been really successful partnerships, it has needed the kind of learning that Stephen talked about, and part of that is an admission that perhaps the local authorities don't know the answers to everything, even though communities might think they ought to. And it's fair to admit that it can be a new and unfamiliar area, and the tools and expertise needed to make some of these schemes happen, or just a new way of looking at how we approach housing, isn't necessarily the automatic thing that we are doing. So, some of this is kind of being met by toolkits in terms of all the legal tools and processes that we can adopt. But if we are thinking about how can we create opportunities for community-led housing, how they become less ad hoc and one-off, but more a regular pipeline of opportunities. So that might be in the sense of sites being made available, it might be in the sense of housing associations or even developers or councils trying to initiate community-led projects by acting as almost like an enabling developer, bringing groups around a project. So there's lots of different ways of doing that. There's a really good piece of work by the Cooperative Councils Innovation Network that kind of lists all the different spectrum of actions that local authorities can take. There's one thing that I think we recognise in the Community-Led Housing London hub in terms of our role of kind of resource and advice is often it's both the skills but also the kind of resource and capacity to do some of this kind of new types of work. And we are trying to recruit and bring more capacity into a role or a couple of roles to be embedded within councils to, if a council does want to achieve something and the impediment is, well, we don't have the staff to focus on this, to bring that staff and make that available partly through the funding. And that kind of then brings me on to thinking about the supply and demand, as I sometimes call it. So we've been going around engaging with a number of local authorities, and particularly mainly ones who've actually approached us to say, this sounds interesting, how can we do more of it? We've been doing a tiny bit of work with people like Waltham Forest who'll speak in a moment, and Tower Hamlets, who are kind of looking at this in a more kind of programmatic initiative way rather than an ad hoc one-off way. But sometimes councils say, this sounds really great, we don't necessarily have that matching up of community demand, and part of the issue there is communities don't know that it's even possible. So I think what we're finding is a really good step is for local authorities to kind of slightly take a lead, have some kind of networking event, workshop, and say this is what the council might be prepared to do, who's interested, and kind of specifying those parameters of what the council might want to do, and trying to see if there are local communities interested in doing it feels like a really good starting point. It's something we're beginning to explore with Croydon, and we've been talking to a couple of other councils about doing that. So I think that's all I'm going to say because my time's up as well. Thank you very much. I'll pass it to Steve.